So rewind a bit, Jill. Remind people, because they'll be thinking, I know the name Michel Barnier. Remind us what he was up to during all those Theresa May Brexit years where so much happened and yet almost nothing happened.
So he actually outlasted Theresa May, but he was asked by the EU, appointed by the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, to lead the EU side, the Commission side, in the Brexit negotiations. So you'll remember that we regularly saw him popping up on our TVs, either in a picture with David Davis, arguably David Davis looking a bit underprepared compared to Michel Barnier. We had Michel Barnier wagging his finger at us, telling us the clock was ticking, and he finally did the sort of deal on the withdrawal agreement, argue how much of a role Barnier had in making the final deal happen, and in the trade and cooperation agreement that Boris Johnson signed on Christmas Eve in those long negotiations at the end of 2020, and that now determines the way in which our relationship with the EU works. So he was a hugely big presence from 2017 through to the end of 2020.
So that's the man, as we remember from a British perspective. How has this happened then, Marie? Because we've just gone from having a very young French Prime Minister, who Emmanuel Macron has had to remove because of the outcome of those the snap elections he called. Paint a picture for us of Michel Barnier's place in French politics.
Well, I mean, it's fair to say it's been a slightly weird appointment. So Michel Barnier has been in French politics since the 70s. So he actually started working as a staffer in the 70s. He's always been kind of on the right, on the centre-right. He's actually got quite, right-wing as time has gone on. So I think he always was seen as kind of centre-right. But then obviously did all the Brexit stuff and then came back to French politics and tried to run for the leadership of Les Républicains, his party. And at the time was very much seen as incredibly sort of right-wing on immigration, especially. So he called for all immigration in France to be stopped for 3 to 5 years. He said that maybe free movement should be stopped altogether. So, very much someone on the right of the party. And has now somehow, as a result of an election where the left came first and the centre came second, he is now the Prime Minister of France. So it's been a bit of an odd choice, it's fair to say.
Now, Marie, you grew up in France, but you've been a journalist in the UK for a long time. There was a period where British politics was a bit wild. And I think, so far the last couple of months has been a little bit quieter. Admittedly, everyone's been on holiday. What's it been like, having lived through some crazy political times in the UK, now seeing France going through its own crazy times?
Well, I mean, I'm taking it quite personally, to be honest. As someone who writes about British and French politics, I feel like finally the election happened in the UK and I thought, okay, it's going to calm down. Finally I can just have a normal life. And then France went, absolutely not. I think we're kind of overdue, to be fair, something in France, because obviously, so we, Macron did win the presidential elections twice in a row. But even then, he kind of in 2017 came out of nowhere. Obviously, he was not part of an established party. He wasn't part of the kind of traditional left or traditional right. So, we had that on the one hand. We had the National Front kind of doing better and better every election. So we kind of knew something was coming. But a bit, I guess, not so like Europe in the Conservative Party for years, where you kind of saw that problem bubbling away. And then it's clearly all exploded out in the open in France. And I'm not convinced the problem that, anyone really will be happy with the choice of Barnier. Because allegedly Macron partly picked him because he was palatable to the far right. But obviously that means that, everyone else essentially is going to be quite cranky. So, yeah, I definitely don't think it's one of those choices where you can think, okay, we can relax now. There's a government. It's all quiet. It's definitely going to be chaotic, I think.
Well, sometimes in politics, rather than going for someone that one group likes, going for someone that everyone sort of dislikes equally is the sort of the path forwards. Because at least if everyone's unhappy, then they might maybe they might go along with it. Jill, what might this mean for? Because clearly it's different because there was an elected president in France, and that, obviously what happens in terms of French policy will be as much Macron as more to do with Macron than Barnier. But what would this mean for Anglo-French relations, given that
I'm not sure it means vast amounts. It'd be interesting what Marie would think. Firstly, because when Keir Starmer meets the head of government, he will still go to see President Macron, and he seems to be buddying up quite a lot with Macron, helped by the fact that Macron keeps on laying on lavish opening ceremonies for Keir Starmer to pop up at. Now, that stops, but I mean, we do expect that relationship deepening will go on. We've seen quite a lot of that as well with the Germans. It's quite interesting because one of the effects of Michel Barnier having played this role as EU lead negotiator, and Keir Starmer, of course, being Jeremy Corbyn's shadow Brexit secretary, means they do actually know each other. And there was an interview last year, I think, that the FT did with Michel Barnier, where he was really quite positive about Keir Starmer, said he thought he would be Prime Minister. And in his diary, his secret Brexit diaries, it's clear that he's rather more impressed with Keir Starmer than he was with some of the government people at the time. But that said, if President Macron ever decides to take Michel Barnier's views on anything to do with Anglo-EU relations, we also know from that FT interview that Michel Barnier did last year that he takes a really hard line on any attempt by the Brits, certainly the last lot of Brits, to try to get any flexibility into the trade and cooperation agreement. It's almost like, the trade and cooperation agreement is Michel Barnier's great work, his whatever, and you're not going to amend a single line of that, and you've got to watch out for perfidious Albion trying to slide in a bit of flexibility here and a tweak there. I mean, he even thought the EU should not move on something where the Germans were pressing the Commission to move. EU car manufacturers were saying, this is nuts, we've all got to move. The UK wanted to move. And Michel Barnier gave an interview saying it would be a mistake to show any flexibility. So insofar as he's involved on that, I think he will be reminding everybody that you can't trust the Brits an inch, and you certainly don't want to concede any territory on that. But I think, as Marie said, he's got quite a lot of French politics to preoccupy himself with, because he's going to have to try and get things done in a situation where he comes from one of the much smaller parties in the National Assembly, and he's got to try to keep this government on the road a bit and try and sort of presumably try and last a bit longer than French prime ministers normally last, to see President Macron through and see the French through to the next presidential elections.
Well, just briefly, Marie, your sense of what this might mean, relations between Paris and London?
I don't think it's going to change anything meaningfully. I think I defer entirely to Jill on this. But yeah, again, I don't think anything will change. And again, France will be quite busy with France, I suspect, over the next few years. So yeah.